Welcome to In the Demo, a show about the stories that get told about groups, how those stories got made, what we think those stories get wrong, and why it matters. You hosts? Farah Bostic is the founder and head of research and strategy of The Difference Engine, a strategic insights consultancy focused on helping business leaders make decisions. Adam Piano, author and brand consultant and managing director of brand strategy at Arizona State University. You are now in the demo.
I'm Adam Piano, Generation X.
And I'm Farah Bostic, the two Corys generation.
How many? There's two Corys. Are you sure there's not more? I feel like we were besieged by Corys.
I also felt that there had to have been at least three Corys, but according to the Wikipedia entry, the two Corys, there are two Corys.
Oh, I think the Wikipedia headlines should solve every debate that we have, at least at like a pub level. If the headline of the Wikipedia, never mind paragraph 4, but if the headline says the two Corys, the debate is over. That's it.
I think that's right. Now, though, I am concerned that if I scrolled down farther in the two Corys entry, I would find out that there were, in fact, more Corys.
It'll say like in the that crappy agenda that they usually put in there, the table of contents for the entry, it'll say like additional runner-up Corys, adjacent Cory rivalries, wannabe Corys. Yes. So those Corys, just to really get to the bottom of this, were Corey Feldman and Corey Haim, rest in power.
Correct.
And what's your favorite Corey movie of either Corey? Not both Corys, but either Corey.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, I've got to go for the two Corys and tell you it's The Lost Boys. Of course it's The Lost Boys. They were in that movie together.
That's right. That's a classic.
It is a classic. I should rewatch that.
I think I remember, I have a lot of Corey memories now that I haven't thought about the Corys until you said the two Corys, but I'm thinking of License to Drive with Corey Haim, classic, saw it in the theater. Corey Feldman, it was in The Burbs.
Oh, yeah.
Very fond memory of that, although I don't think you could make me watch it now. Tom Hanks in a very strange version of Rear Window.
Yes. Well, he did a lot of like weird suburban anxiety movies because there was also, wasn't he in The Money Pit?
Yeah.
With Shelley Long? Yeah.
Yes, he was with Shelley Long. That's the Wikipedia entry we should be looking at. She's no two Corys, though.
She is not no two Corys.
She might not even have merited one of the Corys at their zenith.
That's rough, though, man. That's rough.
They were huge
I do think,
stars.
yes, at the height of their power, they were getting big movies, and truthfully, she was not. That is fair. But we should probably talk about something other than celebrities from the 80s.
How dare you?
I mean, we could just decide to punt and just talk about our favorite movies from HBO in 1986.
No, I think you're right. Let's talk about
derailed ourselves with the two Corys.
We can. That's why there's an edit button. We can dump that entire thing if you wish.
Good idea. Yeah.
Let's talk about our pals, the 100 million mega consumers that spawned just to move the wheels of capitalism and democracy forward in the most progressive and high volume way with all their energy and idealism that they brought, as was detected when they were in kindergarten.
Yes, we knew then. We knew the way they were drinking their juice boxes that they were going to be the next greatest generation for sure. and like the thing about it is like, it was such an amazing kind of tightrope that we wanted them to walk, right? Like they needed to be really, trusting and obedient and good consumers, but also they still needed to be young people and they needed to be idealistic and they needed to like change things for the better, because otherwise how would we prove that they were the next greatest generation? And so like the pressure was really on.
Yeah. So I think this is funny. The idea that millennials were going to be this perfect idealist generation and they were going to tackle a lot of the challenges that were already evident in terms of climate and in terms of other things that we knew we needed a new force to move forward, to get out of gridlock or to change mindsets. At this young age, they were assigned this role of being really idealistic and open-minded and progressive. And I'm not sure there's data anywhere that says, I'm sure there's data that says they were idealistic. When we talked in an earlier episode about the high school senior survey that's done, it's consistent with every generation, 10 years ahead of them, 10 years ahead of that group, 10 years ahead of that group, that sort of trust in government is consistent. My belief that I can impact the future is consistent with generations ahead of them, older generations. So I wonder where the data came from that might suggest this group would be more idealistic.
I think some of it's a characterization of what they were saying they thought was possible, and also what they were saying they thought they wanted, and that got described as idealism, because you see it like reflected in, there's some Gallup data about work-life balance, essentially. And so like that gets described as optimistic and idealistic about believing that life and work should be worthwhile and have meaning, for example. And, thinking that they want to actually learn and grow in their careers, and seeing like data of like a full 87% of millennials saying professional development is important to them in a job. Why is that described as idealism?
Right.
You spent a lot of money to get the degree that got you the job, or
they're
to
still
get the
paying it
skills
off.
or whatever. Yeah. You should want to progress. And, I don't know. I mean, and also we raised them to want to progress, like to think that getting better at things was important, and that achievement was important. And so why would we think that they would suddenly drop that? But also, I mean, I don't think we did. I think instead we just transmogrified that into, aren't they idealistic? And it's just very funny, because it's like idealism ascribed, for instance, boomers in the 60s is this kind of utopian free love, gender equity, everybody's the same.
Dare you say idealist?
Yeah, dare you say idealists, exactly. But they were bomb throwers. They were going to destroy the existing order, blah, blah, blah. And so they were idealists in this way that also was good and bad, right? Like on the one hand, the dawning of the age of Aquarius, they're going to change everything. And then, oops, they, grew up, got married, and got, mortgages. So now they've sold out. They did not, in fact, change the system from outside of it. And here come millennials going, I just like to like my job and get better at it over time and have some professional development and growth opportunities. And people are like, you idealists.
I know. And this conversation about their idealistic nature and their bent for fixing everything and adjusting the system around them will tie into the conversation we had previously about the HR pitching, that SHRM kind of coming in with, here's how you manage these people. Because yes, there was a hypothesis that they were idealistic around political issues and global issues, climate, and these things that they grew up with, hearing that like, hey, these systems are all crashing, and we know you're going to fix them because you're so many people and you're so great. And Tyler told us that it's your time to shine, so it's true. But then it's like, well, yeah, but they're really hard to manage, and they want what they want, and they might leave a job if it's not good to go get a better job. It's like, well, that's not idealism. That's just equity. They're saying, you know what? I thought about this, and I don't have to stay at a shitty job for 50 years because you might give me a watch. I can just go across the street and take a better job.
Yep. No, I mean, I remember, as a as a young Gen Xer, going and getting one of, my first real job in a full service agency, and working there a couple of years, and then getting a new boss. And she said to me, if you kind of sit tight for like 5 more years, your salary will double. And I was like, 5 more years to get to 60K? Are you out of your mind?
Right.
And I was like, she couldn't have done a better job telling me it was time to go find another job.
Yeah.
Because it was just like, absolutely not. Am I going to kind of keep doing this for 5 more years?
I actually can't.
No.
I remember having the same conversation where it's like I had done the good soldier thing in my first art direction job. And, I was paid fairly, I guess, but I went in and said, hey, like, I can't afford a car and I eat ramen at my desk every day. Like, what's the plan? And they were like, well, we think we could get you to like a 5% increase. And I was like, I don't think you understand how percentages work. That's not going to actually help me. And I understand why it's fair from your point of view, but it's not. And I'm not a millennial. So I was reading those stories as a Gen Xer who was, it didn't concern me until I was managing millennials.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started reading those stories, I think those stories that I remember were written for boomers who owned the business.
Yeah.
And positioned as a point of terror. But for me as a Gen Xer, I was like, but I kind of get this. Like, yeah, they want to make money and they want to pay their bills and they want to know what the path is. These all sound reasonable to me.
Mm-hmm. This has been a thread through so much of our conversations that a lot of what we're describing, even when we're using words that like a neutral read of them would suggest that these were positive attributes to assign to a generation, idealistic, what have you.
Yeah.
That they're actually coming from a place of deep anxiety. I dropped this quote into our shared document about how the non-religious are younger and more liberal than the population as a whole. I'm fairly certain that this came out of an Atlantic article, most likely. So what's interesting about that is, first of all, there's some concern here, I think, about non-religiosity in younger people, and that correlates with political liberalism, which is probably that makes sense. But like, then the population as a whole, it's always like, well, how much more, how much less, whatever. But the other thing about it is that doesn't make people go, oh, good, we might make some progress on social justice issues or other matters of equity that are being held back by, kind of even amongst those religious communities, kind of outdated ideas about how society should be structured,
right.
And yet instead it's like, oh, well, no wonder they're getting involved in high profile social justice blowups on college campuses. And then we've got to, of course, quote Jonathan Haidt in The Coddling of the American Mind, which I just want to burn. That's the one book I probably want to burn.
I know you are. If books could kill a listener.
Yes.
So did you get to that episode yet?
Did.
Yeah, that was very satisfying.
Yes.
That show, I cannot recommend that enough. We should link to it. Not that they need our help. In fact, the other way around. If those guys would link to us, we'd appreciate it. But That's a great show and worth every listen. Now, I don't think it's breaking news that college students engage in social activism on any level, on any side of the issue that they're interested in and intrigued in. I don't know how boomers, who pretty much invented the unruly like sit-ins and we're going to come up with new ways to disrupt the system, which was very effective, started this idea that's like, oh, millennials are they're active. They're politically provocative. It's like, what on earth are you people talking about? You're the guy. It's the Spider-Man meme. It's like, isn't that you? No, wait a minute. Hey.
I personally have a theory about this, which is that I think it has been a really uncomfortable transition for baby boomers to become the establishment. And that having young idealists point at them and say, you didn't do enough, or you're wrong about something, or, whatever, I disagree with you. I have questions in class. Like they weren't expecting that. I think they thought that they had earned the right through the things they had done when they were young to be taken seriously as idealists themselves. But, age comes for us all. And especially like in an academic setting where, there are a lot of social structures about academia, as you well know, that can lead people into, I don't want to say like, I don't know, not establishment thinking or whatever, but like they adopt frameworks, they adopt frames, they think they know best. It is their job to know best. They are instructing you, the student. And the hardest part of teaching, which I've done a very small amount of, is like letting there be space for, yes, let's have a robust discussion about it. Let's disagree. And yet the curriculum's the curriculum. So we have to move on. Right. And I think what happens with people at these kind of higher paid institutions of the likes that Jonathan Haidt works in, like I think that they just thought that they should be given a pass and that they should never be criticized. And that like, well, I'm on the side of right. I'm actually on your side. I basically agree with you politically. Why are you criticizing me? And I think that that's where so many of these books actually come from, is like, I feel aggrieved because you don't like what I said. And so like my favorite part of the end of this paragraph that I shared with you is, first of all, by all means, quote to Emile Durkheim, talking about collective effervescence and like how when, groups of people sing and sway and chant, it builds up a kind of electricity. But the last line of it is, and that's how a person can end up screaming repent at a stranger for the crime of holding a funny sign.
Yeah, I love anecdata. That's my favorite thing. They're going to convert that. They're going to convert one anecdote into an entire, scientific study. It's like, actually, you're giving me one example. Like, okay. Well, Is that at scale the issue that we're dealing with, or is it something else?
No, and like to prove it that someone yelled repent. But also, I think part of the point of that piece was that, okay, they are nominally non-religious.
Yes.
But they have formed a new religion of basically political correctness or wokeness or whatever you want to call it. And that this is somehow bad. I don't know, like literally there's like a Pamela Paul piece as usual in the New York Times about how like the only people that will be hurt by these, free speech crusades are the students that are protesting the free speech. And I'm like, I don't, our whatever 130th mass shooting incident in 90 days of this year so far, people trying to criminalize access to medical procedures for women and trans people, book bannings in schools, all kinds of, a former president under indictment. Like, I don't know. I'm just going to go ahead and say that like a couple of students complaining about the banh mi in the fucking cafeteria, pardon my language.
How dare you?
It's just not important. It's just not important. I get that you think it's important. I get there's like some direct pipeline from, the conservative Stanford Review to your desk of every time some lib on campus says something silly. But that doesn't actually make it a thing, and stop trying to make it a thing. And it also undermines the actual idealism they have, which is their birthright as young people.
And I'm glad you brought this up. So the template that was set by Coddling of the American Mind, and I don't think they even intended to set this template, but they did. Thanks, guys. Is what you see play out, that anytime whatever happens in the news, we're going to twist it into a narrative that Fox News can run with and make it about the protest. It's never about the thing that's being protested. It's about the protest and how the protest is out of line and the protest is wrong. Or look at these kids. Can you believe these people and how they're behaving? It's wrong. It's going to millennials and not our current state of absolute abject disaster. With regard to millennials and the coddling of the American mind, they were getting both of these things concurrently, which was these damn idealist kids don't know that they're rocking the boat, and how dare they? And it's because we're letting them think that they have power and we're letting them think that they have a right to speak. What the F? But also the Tom Friedman quote that you pulled, which is like the opposite, but also punitively attributing to them this idea that they're not activist enough.
Yeah. I mean, the line is amazing. First of all, we have to acknowledge that he decides to call millennials Generation Q, with the Q standing for quiet. And so while I'm impressed by how optimistic and idealistic you are, I don't understand why you're so pragmatic. And then says, quote, America needs a jolt of the idealism, activism, and outrage. It must be in there of Generation Q. That's what 20-somethings are for. And then says an online petition or a mouse click for carbon neutrality won't cut it. So it's that de minimis thing, right? It's just hashtag activism. It's just signing an online petition. Nobody cares. They're not doing the right things with their idealism and activism and outrage, according to us.
And so they get it from both sides of the conversation. They get, whoa, look how rowdy they are. They're abusing their speech. And then also they're abusing their privilege that they've earned to speech. Like at their scale, they should be solving all these issues. And then they protest and we say, well, not like that. That's not the way to do it. Let's not. Whoa, there's 100 million of you guys. You have to understand that when you speak, it's louder. It's like very similar to how other groups are treated in a very similar way, where it's like, we want you to speak. We want to hear from you. Whoa. Do you know how your voice carries when you speak like that? Like you sound angry. And it's like, yeah, we are angry. Like,
yeah. I mean, here's Friedman out saying he wants millennials to demand answers from every candidate coming to campus. But then we have Jonathan Haidt in The Coddling of the American Mind quoting to like the FIRE studies about people being deplatformed on college campuses, which of course is such a vanishingly small number of speakers being deplatformed, whatever that even means. And if you take out Milo Yiannopoulos, if you take out Milo, then there's nobody left.
No, I think they did the research on If Books Could Kill, and they said it was 42 cases, and if you took him out, it's like 35 or something like that. I don't have the numbers exactly right, but I know the total number was in the 40s that is cited in the coddling. And it's like, what are you guys? You're trying to make a story out of this? This is not a data point. There are I mean, come on. There are hundreds of college campuses, and you have 40 examples. It's just do the math.
Right.
That doesn't add up.
So demand answers, but not like that. Ask tough questions about climate change and Social Security and the budget deficit, performing Social Security and dealing with the U.S. budget deficit, not historically high-profile youth topics. But nevertheless, I think like that depends on a framing question. But the idea of you're not doing it right is just the ongoing narrative about them from basically the time that they're getting ready to graduate from college. Whatever it is, getting a job, running for office, getting politically active, buying houses, getting married, any kind of major adulting milestone, it doesn't matter what it is, they're doing it wrong.
Yes. However they proceed with it, it's wrong.
Yes.
It's not the ideal way, especially if it doesn't exactly benefit somebody that's already in the established position of power.
Yeah.
And
if anything, you would have thought, I mean, raised by a boomer, raised by two boomers who talked a lot about that you needed both. You needed both changing the system from within and without, and that there were lots of ways to change things for the better. And so you have in this Salon piece from 2013, this description of pragmatic idealism for millennials, where they have high ideals and strong commitment to those ideals, but they also know that what can I actually do? And the examples of things that come up in the piece are described as small, steady, incremental, practical. It's calling your congressman's office.
It's hashtag.
It's writing a letter. And yet because they're doing it electronically, that must be the wrong way to do it.
Well, they are digital. They are digital natives. Don't forget. So
they are digital natives. But I mean, in fairness, I think over the last several years, those same millennials have learned nope, they just got to jam up the phone lines because they have been told by former staffers that we just ignore emails. We don't even read those. So if you actually want to get in front of your elected in some way, you actually have to show up to town halls, and you have to go to marches, and you have to call the phone number listed for your congressperson.
And Farah, what happens when they show up?
Oh, well, we don't like that. And sometimes we arrest them.
Why are they so vocal?
So
why are they so aggressive?
Yeah. Right.
And it's not just politics. I mean, yes, it all relates to politics, and it all relates to the established power structure. But an interesting place for us to dig in, as an example, I think is climate change and quote unquote, interest in green solutions, which if you objectively look at the progress that has been made in real green solutions, like the number of electric cars on the road and the number of solar panels installed, and there has been a lot of positive progress made, but it's just not enough. But if you look at the way it's reported, it's still treated like a fringe thing. And the solutions that millennials were interested in or pitched take on this tenor. Almost everything that relates to millennials comes down to If we can market it and sell it to them, it's acceptable. And if we can't, then we're going to object to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of green solutions becomes this thing. It's like, oh, I can put a leaf on my cleaning product. And now I love that millennials are into green solutions.
Mm-hmm.
But if it means like I'm an oil company and they're going to stop buying gas, no, they're too active. I can't have that.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, it is another every which way is the wrong way. And so if they aren't, mounting the parapets, then they're not doing it right, says Tom Friedman. If they're putting their money where their values are through consumer behavior, then they're not sincere. If they're only doing it through their consumer behavior and not doing the political activism, then it's not sincere. If they're only doing the political activism but still buying a gas-powered car, then they're not sincere.
Right.
And so there is no right way to do this, I guess, except to be rich enough, frankly, to do all of those things, to have the time off to go protest, to have full access, probably through money, to elected officials, to have the money to afford the electric vehicles before, all the subsidies started to come in, which makes them approaching affordable.
Right.
And, years ago, I did a project where we were using a segmentation that was about how like shades of green consumerism. And what was fascinating about it is it's just a very weird way to think about so-called green consumerism anyway, because we would then like try to find people qualitatively, and you would have somebody who was living, in a part of the country where they live on a well. They have some solar panels that they have. I mean, this is a while back, actually, kind of before there were really cheap solar. They had figured out a way to put some solar together for some parts of their property. So like maybe they're heating their water with solar, but the rest of the house is still on natural gas or wood stoves or whatever. They are keeping chickens. They are growing a lot of their own vegetables, and they're driving Ford F-150s. And, all of those things are true. So are they green consumers? Yes or no? And it's like one of the problems was a kind of shorthand of, well, were they politically liberal? If they were politically liberal, then they're green consumers. If they're politically conservative, then they're not. And yet those behaviors add up to a far reduced carbon footprint than someone just living in a normal suburban tract home with access to all the public utilities.
100%.
And, we see the same thing on a project we've been working on recently about apparel, where this company has invested quite a bit in certifications as fair labor and fair trade and renewable and recyclable materials. And they've spent a ton of money on those certifications, and nobody cares. In fact, they find them kind of suspect, because it's like, you've spent more time and money getting the badge than on doing the work and telling me about it. And now I don't really trust you. And to your point, like put a leaf on it and now I'm not BP anymore. Like, no, you're still BP.
No, you're BP.
We know what
you're
it
not
stands
British.
for.
You're not British Petroleum anymore. It's like we surrounded our logo with leaves. You see, it's positive. It's good now. Yeah,
exactly. And you see it play out with like little waves of ideas about like people wanting purposeful brands or brands with a mission, and so now everybody's got to have their brand manifesto or whatever.
Oh no, manifestos predate millennials. Don't you dare. But a manifesto,
yes, they absolutely do.
But a manifesto that says we dream of a sustainable future is tied to the growth, the maturation of the millennial generation.
It would be really funny to do some kind of meta study of publicly traded companies' 10Ks for like how often sustainability or mission or purpose or whatever got mentioned over a period of time. Surely someone has done this.
I'm making a note. I bet we could do it with ChatGPT. I bet ChatGPT could help find those. I'm making a note of it in our document because I think that's interesting.
Yeah, because there's some data from one study we found that was like 8 in 10 consumers said they took action to support a company when they believed in its purpose. And that across all generations, 90% agreed that if a brand or company truly lives by a clear and strong brand purpose, they would be more likely to support them. I mean, this isn't a novel concept in marketing of like, this brand shares my values. Like, that's all that really reflects. Like, it's not any mission, right? right? There are plenty of brands with a mission that I don't agree with. And so I'm not going to support them just because they have a mission. Where our values interact is a reason to all other things equal, I should buy it. But the problem is the all other things equal. And
so, yeah, how many studies, I'm going to ask you this question. I know the answer. You've been doing consumer research for more than 20 years. Every time, if you show them a menu of things with no variables of price or availability, and you say, this one will kill small children, this one is healthy, this one is not only healthy, but it's green and sustainable. In a focus group or any environment in which someone thinks there's a camera on them, they're always going to say, oh, that sustainable one, that's the best answer. And then you go, okay, well, it is actually 13 cents more. And they go, oh, no, I'm not.
Well, and I'm maybe a little more charitable about it, where I don't think it's just because they think the camera's on them. I think it's sincere. Like if all other things are equal, then yes, I want to buy the thing that's good, right? Like people don't want to walk around knowing they're doing cynical. The wrong thing.
I guess that's true.
I know. In general, people want to feel like they're doing the right thing most of the time. And the problem is like there are equities to be balanced about what the right thing is. And if I'm feeling like I need to be careful about our household spending, then I might make a trade-off about, okay, well, what that is a thing I'm going to buy frequently. And that 13 cents a pop makes a difference in my budget. Or I feel like it does. And
how much
there
of
are just
right
like other
thing can
values
I do?
of Yeah. And being prudent, looking after the financial health of my family or my household is also an important value. Like bankrupting yourself to do this is not practical.
Yeah. And the 13 cents a unit is a totally different conversation than the electric car, where it's like, I actually can't even afford it. If you told me the Prius is the same price as the Tercel, it's like maybe, but it isn't, for the same cabin quality. It's like, that doesn't even make sense to me. I have to pay for this car.
Yeah. I mean, that's rapidly changing and will continue to change. And those prices will finally start to come down. It took, however, effectively industrial policy to make that the case. So this isn't something that is entirely driven by consumer demand. If anything, I would say like one of the things we see as these products improve, the prices reach parity with traditional consumer brands is that people will buy these things. They absolutely will. But you've got to bring it in line with affordability. You've got to bring it in line with access. And when they're hard to get, I mean, one of the things I've noticed out where I live is just a little bump in the electric Mustangs. And I think the reason, as I've just been chatting with people, is those were available. They were on a wait list for a cheap Tesla with the tax credits. But the Mustang, they could get that in 8 weeks instead of in 6 to 9 months.
Right.
And so they wanted to stop paying at the pump now because gas prices were so high out where I live. So it made sense. Now they had the means to do that. They were able to pull that together. But there's a lot about just what's available. And for years, we've been talking about this kind of purposeful brands and sustainable brands and all of that stuff in ways that kind of constantly raise the stakes and make it harder as opposed to making it easier.
Yeah.
And then have other funny things where there's a lot of greenwashing. I mean, one of the criticisms of ESG investing is that a lot of it's nonsense. And now, is that the consumer's fault that it's nonsense? I mean, that there is a slate of sophisticated investors as well as less sophisticated investors who think that equity, sustainability, and governance are important to the bottom line of businesses going forward. I don't think they're wrong theoretically about that. But what gets accounted for in deciding that it's an ESG play can be utter bullshit. And so is that the consumer's fault? No. Then so if consumers back away from ESG investing or advocates for it say it's not ready, is that a failure of the idealism of the consumer or the investor class? And I say no. It's just cart and horse all the time. They're just constantly reversing the causality on things.
And that's the ping pong match that we're always in with the story of millennials is some writer decides they are idealist. And then through a book like Millennials Rising, they extrapolate what their ideals are, what areas they're interested in, they preach and they build a cult of prophets that are out there talking about how to maximize, how to sell to these people, how to hire them, how to fire them, how to manage them, how to draw profits from them. But those people, that cult needs topics. They need material. They need to have things to talk about. So all of a sudden, sustainability rises to the top, ESG rises to the top, corporate social responsibility. These things rise to the top as a way to satiate this audience, a way to attract this audience. And you can see almost immediately the PR aspect of it more than the real. It's more like, well, what are we doing that we can talk about and that we can frame in this way? It's not lies, but it's like, oh yeah, no, we're meeting these requirements. Look, here's what we're doing. That's a press release. Versus, you know what? If there really is this group of people, that's 70 million people that are coming into the dominant financial consumer category, how might that transform business, and how should we adapt? There's a 5 to 7 year lag of like the press release war of just keep telling them we're put a leaf on it and we got rid of this one ingredient and we're doing, these tiny, small incremental moves. And then blaming that group is like, well, we had to get rid of that cancer causing chemical because the millennials, sheesh. So now everybody's got 20 cents more. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
About this
well,
logic.
This is my favorite recent one. My mother informed me the other day that she had read something sometime back about the soda manufacturers taking the word diet off of the Diet Pepsi, Diet Coke, whatever, because probably because of, frankly, some shoddy market research that had people saying, diet is a fat shamey word and we don't like diet culture. So it's a turnoff. And meanwhile, how many Gen Xers and elder millennials do I know who are like, you will take this Diet Coke out of my cold dead hands. Yeah. And it'll probably work out to be a mistake on the order of Toyota deciding to postpone entering the EV market in North America, like because of some bad market research that said that range anxiety was just too big of a deal. Meanwhile, they could be out here with a Ford F-150 Lightning competitor and just killing it in the heartland. Yeah. But instead, they did this and now have new leadership. But that's a whole other story. Yeah. I mean, I think that is the kind of bait and switch on these things, the bad assumptions. And then who gets blamed? Well, the millennials, because they don't like the word diet. And it gets so reduced to something as silly as that, when there is a real thing out here in these streets about making people feel bad about their bodies. Like, yeah, it's generally not a good marketing play, except that I also know that, when I was, I jokingly referred for years, this is not a good joke. In retrospect, it doesn't age well. But I used to joke in like the 80s and early 90s during the crack epidemic that there were crack babies, but I was a tab baby because my mother drank so much Tab Cola. And like, if they were out at the grocery store, but it was on a sale, she'd get a rain check, like that level of
that
Tab.
Much? Yeah, that's a lot.
Oh yeah. We had like a refrigerator in the garage that was basically just for Tab. And
that's a lot of Tab.
I did a project on Tab in ad school. And like the heritage of that brand it's the first Diet Coke, basically. And the campaign at one point was like Tab Cola for beautiful people. And these ad campaigns that were about like, oh God, I can't remember how the jingle went, but it was like what you wanted to be as a woman drinking Tab was someone who like made men's heads turn and made them think about you when you weren't around. So you'd have scenarios of like a guy going into a florist shop and the girl at the counter, she's really hot, but then he thinks about his even hotter wife. And so he gets her flowers because she's drinking Tab Cola. We're well past that. It's a legit thing, and it should have an effect on what people choose to buy in the store. But, does taking the word diet off the product help? Probably not. Probably just guts your sales because people think you're not selling Diet Coke anymore. But, you get to this place where instead of it being a clumsy branding move based on some actual movement in consumer patterns, we it's the millennials and the
what will
snowflakes.
What will the headline say? Millennials kill diet.
Millennials kill diet. Exactly. And that's just the pattern that repeats over and over again. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so we keep that endless cycle just keeps turning with we started this whole series looking at those headlines, and every time we dig a little deeper, it rears back up with whatever the next wave. I was just reading this morning about millennials are rooting for a housing bust, but the nut graph is like, so they can afford to buy a house. I can't grudge them for wanting costs to come down so they could buy a house. I don't think they're rooting against me personally as a current homeowner. I think what they're saying is, I sure would like to buy in. Yeah, I get it. I was in your shoes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm hoping for a rental bust in New York City so I can like, yes. I mean, it's.
I think you missed your window there.
Yeah, probably. I'm always missing that window. But I think that is right. It is always the consumer's fault when we're talking about it on this generational level. It is never system structures, economic patterns. It's never policy. It's never, it's never understood in a way that's multi-class. It's never understood in a way that's multicultural. It's never understood in a way that's like, well, there are people who hold power, money, property, and get to decide what we're going to do with it. And then there are people who have less of that power, money, and property, and they would like a piece, please. And that's just how every society is structured, regardless of its governmental form and kind of economic pattern. And so you can like flex to that, or you can just blame them because it makes you sad that you might have to change something.
Yeah. And, I'm looking at, you had shared this article about investing. I think the article's from Stanford Business.
Mm-hmm.
And how the difference between younger investors and older investors and their willingness, their comfort levels with investing in ESG, and putting their money where their mouth is. And it shows essentially that millennial and Gen Z investors, it looks like at more than 3 times the rate, will invest in environmental, social, and governance companies that have those programs in place or something that supports that.
Mm-hmm.
That's not millennials are idealistic. That's at this point, they're investing in proven business models that we can see a return that's increased. Like, it's sound investing at this point. And I struggle to read this article, which is it's a year old. So I'm like, what is the point? What is this article saying? This is insane.
It's also literally standard investing advice that the younger you are, the earlier you are in your career, the more risky and aggressive your investment strategy should be, because you have a longer time for that to earn out. And the closer you get to retirement, the more you should get into conservative, so that you hold on to the wealth you've built.
Yes.
And so that chart absolutely just looks kind of like that to me. Like, if I'm a baby boomer and I don't really know what ESG is, I'm not moving my portfolio around right now when I'm in retirement. Like, I'm making teeny tiny moves. And the other thing that happens as you get to be a baby boomer, I've had this conversation across projects and just with family members, is like, I feel like baby boomers in particular are sensitive to, if it feels bad out there, they are convinced that their portfolio is down.
Yeah.
Whether it is or it isn't.
In general.
Yes.
Yeah,
and that's because they are the closest to needing to rely on that money. And like, it just feels way more perilous for them than it does for someone in their late 20s. Yeah. And it should. Like, that's entirely reasonable. But once again, instead of talking about it as life stage, we're talking about it as some sort of generational attribute or defect.
Yeah. So you don't talk about it in life stage in mass media. Like, if we were to go search on AARP, we would probably see an article that talked about that life stage, and it wouldn't address it directly. It would address it as, this is sound practice, but it would never say, like, if you're over 60. And then there are hardly any articles, there are hardly any writers that look at it, or I shouldn't say there are hardly any. There are hardly any accessible writers producing content that talks about the system and the cycles. It's always boiled down to this group versus that group. Or this trend is happening, and here are the people to blame, or here are the people that should get the credit, versus the cycle you just laid out. As you get older, your investments, your political views, your leanings, like is more conservative. You're trying to protect what you've already built. You're stockpiling money so you can leave things to your family. It's like your attitude changes. That maybe it's because it's assumed that everybody understands it. I don't know. But even in the article from Stanford Business, it says just beneath that chart, overall, 83% of all respondents in this study, so that included Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers. Overall, 83 of all of the respondents said they think their personal views should be considered when mutual fund managers use their shares to vote on environmental or social issues. Because what another piece of classic investing advice is like, invest in what you know, invest in the products you use, invest in things you understand. Don't invest in things you don't understand. When you're making an investment, you're investing with what you think is going to happen. You're not just throwing money on the roulette wheel. You're saying, my personal opinion is that there's going to be more electric cars. Therefore, I'm going to look for services that support that. That might be battery manufacturers. That might be X, Y, or Z. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm idealistic about it. It just means, hey, shit, I see solar everywhere. How can I invest in that?
Yep. Right.
But it gets,
and this is, you're absolutely right. It is not talked about as like, this is just normal. The other thing they say in there is the average investor in their 20s or 30s was willing to lose between 6 and 10% of their investments to see companies improve environmental practices, whereas the average boomer was unwilling to lose anything. Now, of course, the average is doing a lot of work here. There are some people in that 20s and 30s group who aren't willing to lose anything. And there are some boomers who are willing to lose quite a bit. But at the same time, you're right. It is this investing. So I worked on an emerging markets exchange traded fund launch several years ago. And it was fascinating because you got like the baseline, mutual fund, 401k kind of investor. And that person who isn't very sophisticated, you're absolutely right, is advised to like invest in things you understand. And if you're going to actually start buying individual stocks, definitely do that. Invest in companies you understand.
Yeah.
And my friend Jane Barrett years ago started a business called Goldbean that she ultimately sold. The whole idea of it was like, look at where you spend money, and then we'll tell you about which of those companies are publicly traded and give you some information about the investment prospects of buying individual stocks in those companies. Because she had like said, hey, I spend a lot of money at Whole Foods and Apple, and maybe I should buy some stock, get some piece of that back.
That's how we were taught to invest.
Absolutely. And then when you become more sophisticated as an investor, what one of the founders of this company told me is that it switches slightly. And so now it's not just invest in things you understand. It's use your investments to express your preferences about how things ought to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so if your belief is there should be more trade in emerging markets, there are a variety of strategies for doing that. If you want to see more infrastructure investment in India or whatever, there are funds that you can buy into that support infrastructure investment in India. If you want to have more consumer choice in the BRIC countries, then you can invest in Coca-Cola, companies in order to do that because they're selling their products into those companies, or into those countries. That is just a slightly more sophisticated version of this. And what we're seeing here essentially is younger investors saying, I would like to express my interests while also investing in things I understand.
So yes, and it is both more sophisticated, but it is also requires more capital to take that view because you have to be able to put more on the line to make that impact. Now, what's interesting about the chart, as well as some of what we've already talked about, is that they're already starting. I think we've touched on this in earlier episodes. Gen Z is included with millennials. Like they're just rolling them up. It's like, oh, you're not a boomer, you're on the other team. So in the chart, it is our cat has their own. Gen X is it is miraculous that we're even mentioned. Thank you, Stanford, for considering us as a generation worthy of analysis. But then millennials and Gen Z together, because again, so many Gen Z are under 18 and really shouldn't be at all. But they're already getting lumped in with being the next people that are going to save us and the next level of idealists. And I don't know if you know this, Farah, but there's a Gen Z representative who is going to turn the entire government around.
Yeah, by the way, he's a millennial. Yes, I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit about him because I think next time we wanted to talk about millennials and politics. But I think that is that rolling it up and just like, okay. And also just seeing the narrative about millennials just rolled on to Gen Z. And just like, it's just youngs, you know,
millennials part deux.
Yeah, exactly. and you know, and what I think also is funny is the emergence recently in kind of pop discourse of the phrase elder millennial. I still prefer newly old because I think it's funnier. Because it's less about being a millennial and just like, welcome to 44.
But we've also talked that they age people out of millennialism when they, as if it's a cult, they will change the criteria for what qualifies as a millennial. Basically, if they become a homeowning conservative parent, it's like, well, they're not really millennials anymore. They're almost like quasi boomerish. We'll call them Gen X just to rule them out here. The goalpost moves a lot, and we've talked a lot about who set the years for this and how they've shifted at the beginning, you know, in the turn of the century. Turn of the century sounds like a crazy thing to say, but we lived through that.
We did, barely.
But now they're moving the goalposts again. They're changing the ages again. When they report on millennials, it may not be that traditional age set, that traditional sample size of what was 100 million, then was 70 million. You have to read really carefully the fine print because you know, a 40-year-old millennial just sounds confounding to a boomer. And so they're like, well, it's really people 18 to 30. And it's like, no, you can't just redefine it. I'm telling you, that's not fair. That's not right. If you want to have data that is even close to telling a story.
Yes. We did not suddenly decide that boomers included people born in 1972 just because it was fun. And yet that has happened, right? Like the Millennials Rising is fairly explicit that it's 80 to 2000, 2002.
I give them credit.
I see increasingly,
they stayed consistent there.
They did. But what has been happening over time is this pushing it back to like, well, maybe it's 96. And I can almost see the argument for 96. The argument for 96, as I would understand it, is this. You would have been in school at kindergarten when 9/11 happened. So you might have a memory of 9/11. And if you're born after 96, you probably don't have much in the way of a memory of 9/11.
Right.
And letting that be the bookmark is an interesting choice. But it does also mean that all of a sudden, this very nice guy from Orlando is a Gen Zer instead of a millennial, which he would be under Millennials Rising. And it also, to your point, does seem to be like, actually, we'd rather talk about young people. So we would rather stop talking about you at about the time you turn 30. Which is just like, I mean, basically since the invention of teenagers, I think we have decided that youth ends at 30. And that's the end of that, right? Yeah. Like once you're 30, you're not a kid anymore. And also as a brand or a marketer or a media hub, I don't want you because I won't, you know, there is still just such a belief in, if I get you young, I'll keep you forever and you'll be valuable to me ad infinitum. And I won't have to work as hard once you get past 30 because I've already got you.
Yeah.
And it's more fun to work for the youngs because you can do cool photo shoots and make content or whatever.
You know, I've thought about that part. Yeah, I'm also cynical about it. And I've thought about that aspect of it too. And I've wondered if that's another cycle, which is a labor cycle where we want to focus on young consumers. The stated wisdom is what you just said. The stated wisdom is, oh, we're going to build loyalty, which, by the way, you and I know is a pipe dream, but for most categories. But I wonder if, like, when I was a young person, before I had the gall to go in and say, hey, I can't afford a car. What are you going to do to take care of me? I wanted to work on stuff for young people because it was sexier and more interesting. And the lower wage was like, yeah, but I get to go to New York and I get to go do these things. And I shoot these commercials for like with fashion brands. Like, that's cool. Versus if they would have said, okay, Adam, here's your assignment. You're going to design coupons for, you know, whatever, a grocery store. You know what I mean? It's like, well, that's not really that sexy. That's not that interesting. And so I think part of it is we want to appeal to the young because we want young staff to work for a nickel a day in a lot of these fields, and they won't be attracted to it. The energy won't be the same that keeps them here. And I think we've seen over the past 4 years, like the departure of people from agencies and marketing in general who have just realized It really doesn't matter. I do need to pay my rent, regardless of how
I think
cool
it's a
the ads
really
I'm
good
making is.
point. I think that's a really good point because I think there is a certain, if nothing else, there's a belief in that. And, there's also just the long-standing belief that, pharma advertising or cars or whatever, unless it's a luxury car, can't be exciting, that it's all kind of block and tackle. Here's the APR, here's the monthly spring sale, come in now. And the things that feel formulaic don't feel like you're learning anything or whatever. And I think it's also true of agencies in general. Marketing in general is such a cult of the young kind of culture that even the 55-year-old executive creative directors want to wear the cool streetwear and want to know what the cool Spotify playlists are.
Do they want
to go to the shoot with the young celebrity?
Do they want to, or do they feel like they have to?
They feel like they need to. Yeah, they feel like they need to in order to stay relevant. But I think it also feeds their ego of like, no, I'm the cool dad.
Yeah. I think every dad thinks they're the cool dad.
Yeah, that's fine.
I
a lot
know
of dads are cool.
My kids let me know I'm not, so it's good. I've accepted it.
That's the kid's job.
Yeah,
to tell you that you're not, even when you are.
Thank you. I needed that positive affirmation. Everybody should be so lucky to have Farrah giving them positive affirmations. Well, I think we've. I feel like we could talk about this for another hour.
Oh, undoubtedly. I think we say that almost every episode, though,
I know.
Which is why we do another hour 2 weeks later.
I know. And what's funny for people listening to the edited version of this is there's an hour before and there's an hour after that we cut. So to make it
You're
as
welcome.
consumable. Yes. We spare you from some of it, but some of it turns into whole new episodes. So
it's true.
I have a feeling this topic will be revisited as we keep moving through. So there's more to scratch.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I think, our plan next week is to talk about the kind of political alignments, and these things will come up again because these consumer behaviors are lined up against social values. And so they're going to have a lot in common.
Yep. We're not done with this yet. So
Nope.
Excellent. See you soon.
All right.
On the next episode of In the Demo, Farrah looks at narrative intelligence, how systems of power and money tend to drive the shape of myths and narratives, and how the millennial myth was written without the Black and underrepresented members of this huge group in mind. In the Demo is produced by Farrah Bostic and Adam Pierno, with support from the Difference Engine. Music by Omega Man, used under the Creative Commons license. Go to In the Demo podcast for behind-the-scenes research and supporting information.